At 3:12 a.m., her phone started recording by itself. When she woke up, she found a 6-minute voice memo of her own breathing and a man whispering her name. The weirdest part, she lived completely alone. She thought she was alone that night, but at exactly 3:12 a.m., something whispered her name, just once, soft, close, so close she could feel the breath against her ear. When she opened her eyes, the room was pitch black, no movement, no sound. She stayed still, convinced she was dreaming, until she realized her phone wasn't where she'd left it. It was on the floor beside her bed, screen lit up, and the voice memo app was running. When she pressed play, she heard herself sleeping. The slow rhythm of her breathing, the quiet creak of the mattress, and then a whisper. Her name, followed by a second of silence and a deep, heavy breath right next to the microphone. That's when she knew. Whatever whispered her name wasn't part of a dream. Her name was Emily Jacobs, 22 years old, a senior at Oregon State University. She lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment just off campus, a quiet neighborhood, clean, safe, and close enough to walk to class. She'd lived there for nearly a year, without a single issue. No strange neighbors, no late-night knocks, nothing that made her feel unsafe. Her friends described her as logical, calm, the kind of person who laughed off ghost stories and horror movies. But during her final semester, something started to change. It began small, so small she didn't even notice it at first. Her phone would sometimes be on a different side of the bed when she woke up. The bathroom light would be on in the morning, even though she swore she turned it off before going to sleep. One night, she came home and found her window cracked open just an inch. Not enough to seem suspicious, but enough to make her pause. She blamed it on herself. Stress, finals, late nights, and too much caffeine. Everyone gets forgetful sometimes. But there was one thing she couldn't explain. Every night, just after she turned off the lights, she heard a faint clicking sound, somewhere behind her bedroom wall. It wasn't steady. It wasn't mechanical. Just a soft, irregular tap, like fingernails brushing against drywall. She told herself it was pipes, or maybe a squirrel in the vents. Anything that made sense. And for a while, she managed to believe that, until the night she woke up to the whisper. It happened 3 nights later. Emily had been up late studying, finishing a project that was due the next morning. When she finally turned out the lights, it was after 2. Rain was falling outside, steady and soft against the glass. She remembered rolling over, pulling the blanket up and closing her eyes. Then, the sound. A faint shuffle, somewhere near the foot of her bed. At first, she thought it was part of a dream. Her body was heavy, her mind half asleep. And then, she heard it. A whisper, her name. Emily. Her eyes snapped open. The room was pitch black. The only light came from the red glow of her alarm clock. She held her breath, listened. Nothing. She reached out toward the nightstand for her phone, but her fingers brushed against empty wood. It wasn't there. That's when she heard it again. The whisper, closer this time, right beside her ear. Emily. She froze. The air felt heavy, thick. Her pulse was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Without moving, she whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. And then, just barely audible. Breathing. Slow, uneven, coming from somewhere near the edge of her bed. She didn't move, didn't dare. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't make her body obey. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. She couldn't tell. Eventually, she turned her head toward the window. Rain still pattered softly. The world outside was calm, as if nothing was wrong at all. When dawn came, she sat up, shaking, and finally turned on the light. The room was empty. The door locked from the inside, the window still sealed shut. Then she saw her phone. It was lying face down on the floor beside the bed, screen still glowing faintly. The voice memo app was open and had been recording for 6 minutes. She didn't remember opening it. She didn't even remember touching her phone. Her hands trembled as she pressed play. For a moment, there was only the sound of her own slow breathing, a soft creak of the mattress. Then, halfway through, a whisper, her name, followed by a long, deep exhale. And then, silence. Emily didn't sleep the next night. She couldn't. She kept replaying the recording, hoping to find an explanation, hoping to hear something that made it all make sense. But every time she listened, the whisper sounded clearer, more deliberate, almost like whoever said it was leaning right over the microphone. The breathing that followed wasn't hers. She knew the sound of her own. This one was slower, deeper, male. By morning, she decided she needed someone else to hear it. Her friend Daniel was an audio engineering student. When she played him the file, he didn't say a word at first. He just listened, twice, then opened it on his laptop to look at the waveform. After a minute, he frowned. "There are 2 distinct patterns here," he said. "Your breathing, and someone else's, right next to the mic." Emily felt her stomach drop. Daniel asked if maybe she had a roommate, or if someone had been staying over. She shook her head. She lived alone. He sat back, uneasy. "Then this doesn't make sense," he said. "Whoever whispered your name was standing within a foot of your phone." Emily went straight to campus security. They checked her locks, her windows, and the hallway cameras. No signs of forced entry. No one seen entering or leaving. Nothing. The officer suggested she might have sleepwalked, pressed record in her sleep, imagined the rest. But she didn't believe that, because she remembered the sound of that breath right beside her, and the way the air had felt thick and cold against her skin. A week passed. No more whispers, no new recordings, just the same uneasy quiet. Until one morning, she woke to the sound of footsteps. Not in her apartment, but directly above her ceiling. Except there wasn't supposed to be an apartment above hers, only an unused attic space. Emily reported the footsteps the same morning. This time, the police took her seriously. 2 officers arrived, checked the attic hatch in the hallway ceiling, and found a fresh padlock, installed from the inside. They forced it open. The space above her apartment was small, dusty, and filled with insulation. But in one corner, they found a sleeping bag, a half-empty bottle of water, food wrappers, and a small box of tools. Someone had been living up there. When the officers pulled the insulation aside, they discovered several narrow holes drilled straight through the floorboards, each one leading down into Emily's ceiling, right above her bed. Later that day, they arrested a maintenance worker who lived in the complex. He had been sneaking into the attic through a service hatch in the laundry room, hiding there during the day and watching her at night. He admitted to nothing, but the evidence was enough. Police also found his phone, filled with dozens of audio files. Recordings of Emily sleeping, whispers, her name repeated again and again. After the arrest, Emily moved out within the week. She changed schools, changed numbers, changed everything. She still keeps that 6-minute recording on an old USB drive. She says she never listens to it anymore. But she can't bring herself to delete it either. Because for 6 minutes, it captured the sound of her worst nightmare. A voice in the dark, whispering her name from less than a foot away. If you heard your own name whispered in the dark, would you want to know who said it? Emily found her answer, and she'll never sleep the same way again. But her story is only one of many. Because sometimes the things we think are imagination, the creaks, the whispers, the shadows that move when no one should be there, aren't imagination at all. In the next story, a man buys an antique mirror at a yard sale and discovers the reflection isn't following him anymore. It's watching him. Subscribe if you dare. Turn off the lights, and I'll meet you in the next story. She always felt a draft in her bathroom. No matter how tightly the window was shut, cold air slipped through the mirror itself. At first, she ignored it. It's New York. Every old apartment breathes through its walls. But one night, as she brushed her teeth, she watched the mirror tilt, just slightly, like something behind it had moved. When she leaned closer, the glass shifted again, and a low chill crept across her face. There was no vent, no pipe, just that mirror, breathing. What she found behind it became one of the strangest documented discoveries ever posted online. This is the true story of Samantha Hartsoe and the hidden room behind her reflection. Samantha lived with 2 roommates on Roosevelt Island, a quiet slice of Manhattan wedged between the East River and the city skyline. The building was old, cheap rent, thin walls, the usual city quirks. Still, something about that bathroom unsettled her. It was always 10 degrees colder than the rest of the apartment. The kind of cold that seeped from nowhere and made the hairs on her arms stand up. Every morning she'd feel it, a thin current of air flowing from the mirror above the sink. At first, she thought maybe the glass was loose, or the caulking had cracked. But when she pressed her palm to the edges, the air was coming through the wall itself. She mentioned it to her roommates one night. They laughed it off. Old building, they said. Probably bad insulation. Samantha wanted to believe that, until the clicking started. At random hours, tiny knocks echoed from behind the mirror, like fingernails tapping hollow plaster. Then silence, then another softer tap. She recorded a few on her phone, thinking maybe she could show the landlord. Each time she played them back, the pattern was different, too irregular for pipes. A week passed. The noise didn't stop. Late one night, she stood in front of the mirror, toothbrush in hand, staring at her own reflection. That's when she saw it. A faint movement, not in her, but behind her, like a shadow shift in half a beat too late. She froze, heart pounding. Then the cold gust came again, stronger this time, brushing the side of her neck. Something wasn't right. She set down her phone, gripped the mirror's edge, and pulled. It resisted, then clicked free. Behind it gaped a square hole, about the size of a window. Dark, deep. She shone her phone's flashlight through the opening. The beam cut across dust, pipes, and then open space. There was a whole other room hidden behind her bathroom wall. The light swept across piles of debris, empty bottles, black garbage bags, a broken chair. The floor was scattered with footprints in the dust. Her pulse quickened. Someone had been there. Recently. She backed away, whispering to herself, "This can't be real." It was, and she filmed everything. The discovery, the mirror, the hole. Those clips would later go viral, seen by millions of viewers who couldn't decide whether to be amazed or horrified. But in that moment, standing barefoot on the tile, Samantha wasn't thinking about the internet. She was thinking about what might still be inside. Armed with a hammer, she climbed through the opening. Her flashlight beam wobbled across damp walls and narrow hallways that shouldn't exist. The space was cold, silent, and smelled of mold and dust. On the far side, she found a door, its knob rusted but unlocked. Beyond it, another small apartment. Unfinished drywall, a single bare bulb, an old sleeping bag, and a water bottle half full. It wasn't empty. Someone had been living there. Later, city inspectors confirmed the extra apartment was part of an unfinished renovation abandoned years earlier. But the items inside, fresh trash, tools, personal belongings, suggested recent use. No one ever proved who had been staying there or how they entered. Maintenance crews insisted all other access points were sealed. Yet someone had clearly moved through those spaces. Samantha climbed back through the mirror hole and slammed the bathroom door shut behind her. She and her roommates left the apartment that night and didn't return until management secured the area. News outlets picked up her story within days. TikTok, YouTube, and local TV stations all replayed the same footage. Samantha crawling through her mirror, discovering the secret room, laughing nervously but shaking the whole time. Reporters called it the hidden room behind the mirror. Inspectors later explained that drafts from the unfinished space caused the eerie cold she'd felt for months. But what unsettled people most wasn't the draft. It was the idea that someone could have been standing behind that mirror while she brushed her teeth, separated by nothing but a thin sheet of drywall. Samantha eventually moved out. The building sealed the crawl space and remodeled the unit. She still says she feels uneasy around mirrors, not because she believes they're haunted, but because she knows what can hide behind them. How many walls in our homes are hollow? How many doors are hidden behind paint and plaster? Samantha's story reminds us that sometimes the strangest horrors aren't supernatural. They're structural, built right into the places we trust most. In the next story, a hiker follows the sound of a crying child deep into the forest and realizes it's not a child at all. Subscribe if you dare. And remember, some reflections show more than you ever wanted to see. The first sound was faint, a child's voice carried on the wind. Just 2 words, "Help me." Aaron froze on the trail. There were no camps nearby, no lights, no other hikers, only the sweep of pine trees and the hush of evening fog. He called back, but the voice didn't answer. It only echoed, a perfect imitation, bouncing from somewhere deep inside the forest. He should have turned around. Instead, he stepped toward the sound. Aaron was an experienced backpacker. He'd logged miles across the Smokies, the Cascades, the desert canyons of the West. He knew how quickly daylight dies in the woods, how shadows grow teeth when the compass needle begins to shake. This trip was supposed to be simple, a weekend loop through the Great Smoky Mountains. Late spring, clear weather. But by the second evening, fog rolled in off the ridge. The forest went gray, silent except for the drip of melting snow. That's when he heard it, the small, sharp cry that didn't belong. At first, he thought it was an animal. Then, he heard words. "Help me. Please." It sounded like a young girl, close, but never in one direction long enough to track. Aaron followed the voice off trail. The mist thickened. Every few steps, the echo shifted sides, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. He checked his map. No streams, no cliffs marked nearby. Yet the air felt colder, damper. The calls grew fainter. He shouted again. His own voice broke apart, returning in pieces from the trees. The forest was talking back to him. He thought about the reports he'd read before the trip. Rescuers chasing cries that led nowhere. Wind tunnels, temperature inversions, echoes ricocheting down valleys. Every sound stretched, twisted, repeated, until you couldn't tell what was real. Still, what if it was real this time? He couldn't walk away from the sound of a child. He hiked on. The ground turned slick with moss. Night settled completely. When he raised his headlamp, 2 points of light flashed ahead. Eyes. Small, white, unblinking. He whispered, "Hello?" A bleat answered back. A mountain goat kid stood on a ledge, crying into the fog. Its calls echoed perfectly through the ravine, human to anyone above. Aaron laughed once, shaky, half in relief. Then he heard another sound. Not the goat. A long, low moan from farther down. Something human. He pressed on again. 15 minutes later, the beam of his headlamp caught movement in the wash below. A hand. A real person this time. A hiker lay trapped between boulders. Mud up to his waist. Dehydrated. Shaking. Whispering for help. Aaron scrambled down, radioed a rescue call, and stayed until dawn, while rangers hiked in. They'd been searching for this man since the previous afternoon. No one had known he'd fallen so far off trail. When they pulled him free, one of the rescuers told Aaron, "We followed the wrong cries all night. They came from everywhere. You're the only one who found the real voice." Later, back at the ranger station, Aaron learned something that chilled him. The same ravine had triggered dozens of false alarms. Echoes carried perfectly through the canyon, making one person sound like many. If he'd arrived an hour later, the man would have died. Rescue teams logged the incident as a successful extraction. To Aaron, it never felt that clean. He still hears that echo in his head sometimes, his own shout returning like a stranger's plea. He keeps thinking about how close the real voice was to being lost in the noise. Months later, he hiked a different trail and heard laughter roll through a valley. It was just another group of backpackers miles away. Still, for a second, his stomach turned. Because in the wilderness, sound doesn't behave like it should. It bends, it lies, and sometimes it begs. Aaron's story reminds us, the forest doesn't need monsters to be terrifying. It only needs space, enough for your own voice to come back to you wrong. Next time you hear someone calling from the dark, remember the mountains echo everything we say, even the things we never meant to. In the next episode, a security guard spends the night in a shuttered museum and discovers the motion sensors aren't reacting to him. Subscribe if you dare, and keep listening, because sometimes the forest listens back. Museums are meant to be quiet after dark, but sometimes the exhibits move, at least according to the alarms. Marcus had been a night guard for 8 years. He'd heard every sound a building could make. Pipes groaning, glass settling, wind scraping the skylights. But that night, when the motion sensor in Gallery 6 went off for the 4th time, he knew this wasn't wind. Because Gallery 6 was sealed, and when he checked the cameras, something small crossed the infrared grid. Something with heat. Marcus worked the overnight shift at the city's Museum of Antiquities. Marble floors, echoing halls, and rooms filled with artifacts that had outlived civilizations. The job wasn't glamorous, just long hours and the low hum of the HVAC system. Most nights he read during rounds or stared at the monitors until sunrise, but lately the sensors had been acting up. Every night around 2 a.m., the motion detectors in the West Wing tripped in sequence. Room 12, then Gallery 6, then the Egyptian exhibit. Each time he'd check, the rooms were empty. No open doors, no flickering lights, no intruders. Maintenance blamed drafts. IT blamed calibration. Marcus blamed boredom, until that night when the alarms started walking. It began with a soft click on his console. Room 12 active. Then, 10 seconds later, Gallery 6. The displays showed heat signatures, faint, moving from case to case, as if someone were pacing through the darkness. He grabbed his flashlight and keys. The museum was silent except for his own footsteps. When he reached Gallery 6, the air felt thick and cold. The sarcophagus stood under its glass cover, the hieroglyphs dull in the emergency light. Everything else was still. He swept the beam across the floor. Nothing. But the console in his hand buzzed again. Now the signal came from the far side of the room. He turned. Something darted through the beam. Small, quick, metallic. He jumped back, nearly dropping the light. It was gone. When he checked the floor, he found nothing but a single broken wing of a moth. He exhaled, shaky laughter under his breath. Just an insect. A false alarm. He radioed control. False trip. West Wing. Probably a bug. But then the sensors tripped again. Every one of them. All at once. The monitor wall in security lit up like fireworks. Motion in every gallery. Red lights blinking across the map. Marcus ran, flashlight trembling over glass cases and stone statues. Each room looked empty, yet the alarms kept rolling, one after another, like something unseen was circling the building. He stopped in the main atrium, trying to listen past the hum of the air vents. A faint rhythm echoed above him. Click, click, click. He aimed the beam upward. Along the ceiling grid, small shapes fluttered in the warm air currents. A dozen moths drawn to the red LEDs of the sensors. Every wing beat sent new motion data through the system, bouncing between infrared beams like invisible lightning. He laughed again, partly from relief, partly from adrenaline that wouldn't let go. But the laughter died when he checked the temperature log, because the thermal cameras still showed footsteps, human-sized, crossing the atrium floor, right behind where he stood. He spun around. Nothing. He called maintenance in. They arrived an hour later, recalibrated the sensors, and explained the final mystery. The HVAC units had just kicked into a new cycle. Warm air from the ceiling, cold air rising from the marble floor, a perfect mix to fool the heat sensors into reading movement. The footsteps were currents, the ghosts were physics. By dawn, the system was quiet again. Marcus finished his report, logged the anomalies, and turned off the last light in the hall. As he passed Gallery 6, he paused. The moths were gone, but one still lay near the sarcophagus, wings spread, perfectly still under the glass case. He caught his own reflection in the display. For a second, the red alarm light blinked, and it looked like the statue's eyes had opened. He smiled at himself. Just air and optics, he said. But he still walked a little faster toward the exit. In every museum, the artifacts sleep under watchful eyes. some human, some mechanical. Marcus learned that even the most advanced systems can mistake a gust of air for a ghost. But maybe the real mistake is assuming there's no difference. Next time, a late-night custodian discovers an empty hospital wing where every patient file still updates itself in real time. Subscribe if you dare. And remember, in the dark, even machines can dream. Hospitals are built to never sleep. Even after the last patient leaves, something inside keeps breathing. Lights that hum. Doors that sigh open for no one. Luis knew that sound by heart. He'd been a maintenance tech for 20 years. But tonight, when the call light in an abandoned ward flicked on by itself, he realized the building wasn't done calling for help. The St. Bridget Medical Center was closing Wing C, the oldest part of the complex. Every floor had been stripped of equipment. The elevators to that wing were locked. Luis's job was simple. Confirm the power was off before demolition began. He worked alone, flashlight in one hand, checklist in the other. Dust hung in the air like static. Old charts still lined the nurse's station. Paint curled off the walls. Halfway through his inspection, he heard it. Ding, ding, ding. The patient call chime. He froze. The sound came from room 12. According to the records, that room hadn't had power in 5 years. Luis opened the door. Monitors dark, bed empty. Still, the call button above the headboard blinked amber, steady and slow. He followed the wire conduit into the hallway. It led to a control panel at the nurse station. 4 more lights blinked there, rooms 12, 14, 18, and 20, as if 4 patients were waiting. He keyed his radio. Control, this is maintenance. Do we still have power to Wing C? Static. Then a sleepy voice from security. Negative, that feed's been dead for weeks. Luis frowned. If the feed was dead, what was lighting the LEDs? He pulled the circuit log. All breakers showed off. He toggled one anyway. No change. The lights kept pulsing. A noise drifted down the hall. The soft click of an elevator door. The elevator to Wing C wasn't supposed to work. He hurried over. The floor display glowed faintly. B3. Basement level. He hit the button. Nothing. Then, with a sigh of old hydraulics, the doors parted. Empty shaft. Just cables and darkness. When he looked back, every call light in the corridor was blinking now, in perfect rhythm with the elevator bell. Luis ran to the electrical closet and killed the master breaker. Total darkness. For a moment, only the echo of the old air handlers turning down. Then, faint blue light. The monitors in room 12 flickered to life, one by one, though unplugged. Lines traced across the screens, like heartbeats trying to start again. He stepped closer. The glass fogged with humidity, the kind that condenses when current meets cold air. He reached out and pulled the power cord from the wall. The screen stayed on for 3 full seconds before fading. The silence that followed felt wrong, as if the whole building had been holding its breath. The next morning, Luis filed his report. Facilities traced the anomalies to an electrical crossfeed from the active ICU 1 floor above. Moisture in the conduits had re-energized the old nurse call system, causing phantom alerts and residual voltage in the monitor lines. Logical, simple, explained. But Luis still remembers that moment before the power shut down, when the heart monitor pattern steadied for just a heartbeat, as if the building itself sighed with relief. 2 weeks later, demolition crews arrived. When they cut the main feed, Every call light in Wing C blinked once, in unison, and went dark forever. Hospitals heal, then they empty. But sometimes the circuits remember the rhythm of life they once carried. Luis learned that electricity has memory, and silence isn't always peace. In the next story, a late-night radio DJ begins receiving live calls from a frequency that was shut down in 1979. Subscribe if you dare, and listen carefully, because not every signal on the line is coming from the living. Radio static has a sound that can hypnotize you. Between the hum and hiss, sometimes, if you listen close enough, you can almost hear a voice trying to push through. Eddie worked the midnight slot on WCRV Cleveland, AM 1280. It wasn't a big station, just a concrete building off the interstate. But the show was his escape, requests, late-night talk, and music for whoever couldn't sleep. Until the night a dead frequency answered back. It was October 2012. Cleveland was quiet, rain misting the streets. Inside the station, the lights buzzed and the old air conditioner groaned like a diesel engine. Eddie leaned into the mic. "This is Eddie on the Midnight Signal. You're listening to the best of the dark hours. Call in with your stories." Nothing unusual, until it happened. The request line flickered on, line 3. But the phone didn't ring. No caller ID, just a red light pulsing. He hesitated, then patched it in. "WCRV, you're on the air." Silence, then a crackle, and a woman's voice, faint, distant, like a bad cassette. "Is anyone still there?" The line went dead. Eddie frowned. Probably a prank. Maybe someone patched through a test line. He checked the switchboard. Line 3 wasn't connected to the system. It wasn't even powered. He reset the board. But 10 minutes later, the voice came again. This time not through the phone. It bled straight into the monitor channel. He could see it on the meters, faint signal peaks pulsing between his playlist tracks, like another broadcast was hiding underneath his. He isolated the channel. No feed source, just static. And then, the bridge. Don't go over the bridge. The words were warped, buried in noise, but they froze him anyway. Because just last week, a caller named Donna had said the same thing. During a late-night ghost story segment, she'd joked about hearing voices on her old transistor radio, telling her not to drive home over the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge. She'd laughed it off, then stopped calling the show. He looked up. The on-air light above the booth flickered, then dimmed to black. Eddie killed the mic and stepped into the hallway. Everything hummed. The old tube transmitters, the low rumble of Cleveland rain. He followed the cables into the back room, where the repeater rack sat behind a chain-link gate. The air smelled like ozone. On the monitor, the backup frequency, AM 1280B, the old analog relay, was transmitting even though its switch was off. A ghost signal. He watched the readout. 1280. Marts. Modulation. Analog voice. He patched in his headphones. Static. Then a burst of speech. Faint, rhythmic, repeating. "This is WCRV News at 11. Bridge closed, following collision." The timestamp? October 18th, 1994. 18 years old. He backed away slowly. The repeater finally popped and went silent, just as thunder rolled over the city. By morning, the engineers traced the interference. A grounding strap had corroded near the transmission tower, allowing old CB and archived AM data from a nearby police repeater to bleed into WCRV's live signal. Snippets of long-stored recordings bouncing through static. A glitch of electricity and weather. Nothing more. Still, Eddie couldn't shake what he'd heard. When the storm cleared, he drove across the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge on his way home. Halfway across, he flicked on his radio. Just static. Then, for half a second, a voice through the noise. "Thank you for hearing me." He didn't tell anyone about it. But that night, when he went back on air, he signed off differently. "This is Eddie, and if you're out there, wherever out there is, I'm still listening." Radio waves never truly die. They just travel farther than we expect. Maybe too far. Next time, a lighthouse keeper discovers that the distress calls echoing through his foghorn are coming from ships long sunk beneath the bay. Subscribe if you dare, and keep your dial tuned to the dark. Lighthouses are meant to go dark when their job is done. But sometimes, even after the last keeper leaves, the light remembers how to shine. Helen was the caretaker assigned to wind down the North Point Lighthouse. 1 week left until full decommissioning. Then the tower would stand silent forever. At least, that was the plan. Until the night the foghorn started calling again, from a system that hadn't had power in years. North Point stood at the edge of the Atlantic, a century of salt-stained stone and gull-scarred glass. Helen's job was simple: record final meter readings, secure the lens, and lock out the generators. The main beacon had gone cold months earlier. Only the small caretaker's light still glowed in the living quarters, powered by a portable battery bank. The storms that week were brutal. Waves punching the cliffs, mist curling through the stairwell vents. She made her rounds by flashlight, ticking boxes on a clipboard. Everything was quiet, until the foghorn sounded. A deep, mournful note rolled out across the sea. 3 blasts, perfectly timed. Helen froze. That horn had been disconnected since 2004. She climbed to the signal room. The control panel was dark. Breakers open, switches taped off. Still, a faint red LED blinked on the auxiliary battery monitor. She pressed her ear to the relay cabinet. Click, click. Every few seconds, something was energizing the circuit. She radioed the coast station. "North Point caretaker here. Did someone re-enable the foghorn remotely?" A pause, then static. Finally, a calm voice. "Negative, North Point. That system's been dead for 15 years. Helen checked the sea through the windows. No ships. But the foghorn fired again. This time shorter, sharper, like a single word cut into the wind. She shut down the inverter completely, unplugged the batteries, and listened. Silence. Then, faintly, the old radio beacon in the corner crackled to life. A burst of Morse code, tapping through the static. Her training came back in fragments. Dot dash, dot 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 dash, SOS. The beacon shouldn't have power. Its solar array had been removed years ago. Yet the tiny status light glowed steady. Helen stepped outside. Rain swept across the lens room. The sky flickered with lightning. Every flash mirrored off the old Fresnel glass, scattering beams into the fog, as if the lighthouse were alive again, fighting to signal something. Down on the cliff, she saw blue sparks tracing along the metal conduit, salt water bridging the contacts, feeding back a trickle of charge from her maintenance solar panel into the old circuits. Each surge gave the horn a pulse, the beacon a breath, the tower a heartbeat. The dead systems weren't haunted. They were remembering how to work. She disconnected the feed, waited. The final horn blast rolled out across the water, low, echoing, and somehow grateful. Then the lights went out. When engineers arrived 2 days later, they confirmed the cause. Moisture had bridged the corroded relay contacts, allowing residual current from the caretaker's solar charger to re-energize the foghorn and beacon. Simple physics, nothing supernatural. Still, the data logs showed something odd. The system had reactivated exactly at 02:17 a.m., the same minute North Point had first gone live in 1912. Coincidence, maybe. But Helen liked to think the old lighthouse just wanted one last night on duty, one last chance to keep sailors safe. Some beacons never truly go dark. They just wait for the right storm to wake them. Helen stayed on until the final day, when the demolition crew cut the cables. As the sun rose, the wind carried one soft note from the sea, 3 echoes, fading. Next time, an archivist discovers a film reel that plays scenes no one ever shot. Footage of people who were never there. Subscribe if you dare. And remember, some signals don't fade. They linger. Every frame of film remembers light. Even when you erase it, a trace stays behind, a memory burned into silver and chemistry. Amelia worked nights at the City Film Archive, hundreds of cans, miles of forgotten stories. Most nights were quiet, until she unspooled a reel that had never been developed and found 2 lives sharing the same strip of film. It arrived in a plain metal canister stamped News 1957, property of Chronicle Films. The logbook said it had been lost in transit and recovered from a warehouse flood. Amelia set up the scanner, threaded the brittle 16mm through the sprockets, and watched the first images bloom on screen. A city parade, brass bands, smiling crowds, routine restoration work, until frame 317. Behind the parade floats, faint and ghostly. A woman stood in a field of snow. Different lighting, different film stock, completely impossible. Amelia scrubbed back and forth. The woman's figure didn't belong to the scene. It was overlaid, as if 2 realities had been printed together. She checked the metadata. Single-layer emulsion, no composite, no optical printer marks. Curious, she scanned deeper into the reel. Every few hundred frames, another intrusion appeared. A hand on glass, a distant farmhouse, and once, the faint outline of a man staring directly at the lens. She adjusted the scanner's UV lamp. Under alternate light, the second image brightened. It wasn't digital noise. It was latent exposure. Amelia leaned closer, heart pounding. The overlapping images were decades older than the parade footage, judging by clothing and stock pattern, early 1940s. Someone had reused old film during wartime shortages. The previous pictures had never fully faded. Now both histories were trapped on one strip, bleeding into each other like memories refusing to die. Then the soundtrack registered a pulse, faint whispers of magnetic hiss. She boosted the gain. A voice emerged. "Don't throw it away!" The hair on her arms lifted, but she recognized it at once. The echo of her own playback command, looping through the open mic of the scanner. Feedback, not ghosts. Still, the voice matched perfectly to the frame where the man stared at her. Determined to prove what she was seeing, Amelia pulled the reel from the scanner and loaded it onto a light table. Through the magnifier, she could see 2 emulsion layers shimmering. The modern parade and the older winter scene fused together. She documented every overlap, noted the film batch numbers. Everything pointed to one conclusion. During the 1957 shoot, a cameraman had bulk-loaded his magazine with a recycled reel already partially exposed years earlier. Science, not spirits. Yet as she handled the film, she realized something eerie. The older image, the woman in the snow, was looking off-frame, eyes fixed on the direction of the later parade crowd. Two strangers from different decades, sharing a single moment of light, as if one had always been waiting for the other. The last few feet of film were damaged beyond recovery, burnt into swirling silver patterns. But when she reversed the scan, at high contrast, the shapes formed letters. The word, stay. Chemical coincidence, she told herself. Crystals and cracks forming pareidolia. But the message stayed visible, even after the frame cooled. A week later, lab results confirmed it all. Emulsion persistence from the 1940s, double exposure through heat and partial bleaching, no evidence of tampering. The faces were echoes, light trapped in film for 70 years. Still, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been watched. When the restoration finished, she projected the parade one last time. Crowds marched, music swelled, and there, between the floats, a snowflake drifted across the summer street. She smiled. Some memories refuse to fade completely. Film isn't immortal, but sometimes the light that once hit it finds a way to speak again. And with that, our final story flickers to black. Thank you for watching this season of 8 Disturbing True Stories. If you'd like more real-world mysteries that sound impossible but aren't, subscribe, leave a comment about which episode unsettled you most, and remember, every shadow, every echo starts as a trace of light.